The document is 159 pages long. It took 12 years of negotiation, 7 nations, and more than 3,000 hours of direct diplomatic contact to produce. It has a title that most people have never read in full: the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The newspapers called it the Iran Deal. On the 14th of July, 2015, in a hotel in Vienna that had hosted diplomatic negotiations since the Congress of Vienna 200 years earlier, representatives of 7 governments signed it. The ceremony took 40 minutes. The signatories shook hands. The cameras captured the moment. And for the first time in a generation, the words Iran and nuclear appeared in the same sentence as a word that had not been used before: resolved. What Iran agreed to give up under that document is rarely stated in full by the media outlets that covered its destruction. Here is what the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the body whose entire existence is built on nuclear verification, confirmed Iran did. Iran dismantled 98% of its enriched uranium stockpile. It removed 2/3 of its installed centrifuges, more than 13,000 machines, physically disconnected and placed under seal. It poured concrete into the core of the Arak heavy water reactor, which was the only facility capable of producing weapons-grade plutonium. And it accepted the most intrusive nuclear inspections regime ever imposed on any nation in history. Cameras inside facilities, inspectors with access to undeclared sites, continuous environmental sampling, round-the-clock monitoring. 15 consecutive IAEA reports, published quarterly, publicly available, read by every intelligence agency on the planet, confirmed the same finding. Iran was in full compliance. Not partial, not technical, full. The word used in the diplomatic language was verified. In plain language, it means they did what they said they would do. In Tehran, a pharmacist named Parisa, she would become one of millions whose lives would be reshaped by what happened next, noticed the change within months. The shelves that had been chronically short of imported medications began to fill. Insulin, blood pressure drugs, chemotherapy agents. The sanctions relief that the JCPOA promised was arriving. Not as a political abstraction, as medicine, on shelves, in a pharmacy in the Vanak district. This lasted 2 years and 10 months. On the 8th of May, 2018, in the diplomatic reception room of the White House, the President of the United States signed a memorandum withdrawing America from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The signing took 3 seconds. The document he withdrew from had taken 12 years to build. The stated reason was that the deal was insufficient, that it did not address Iran's ballistic missile program, that its enrichment restrictions had sunset clauses, that it gave Iran too much in exchange for too little. These criticisms were documented. They were debatable. What was not debatable, what was confirmed by the United States' own Director of National Intelligence, its own Secretary of Defense, its own Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and 15 consecutive IAEA verification reports, was that Iran was complying. The deal was not broken because it failed. It was broken because it was working. And the working of it was politically inconvenient for an administration that had promised to destroy it. In Tehran, Parisa watched the shelves begin to empty again. Not immediately. Sanctions take time to bite. But by January 2019, the insulin supply was irregular. By summer, it was rationed. The rial, Iran's currency, lost 80% of its value against the dollar in a single year. The medicines on her shelves, the same medicines that had appeared when the deal was honored, disappeared when the deal was broken. Not because Iran had cheated, because Iran had complied. But this was not the first time Iran had been promised something by the West and watched that promise break. It was the third. 1953. A full quarter century before the revolution, before the hostage crisis, before the nuclear program even existed. In Tehran, a man named Mohammad Mossadegh, 71 years old, democratically elected, internationally recognized, ran a government that had done something no Iranian government had done before. It had nationalized the country's oil. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which would later rename itself British Petroleum, a name you know, had controlled Iranian oil since 1908 under a concession that gave Iran 16% of profits. 16. The company's shareholders in London received the rest. Mossadegh's parliament voted to nationalize, not to steal, to nationalize, to apply the same sovereign right over national resources that Britain itself had exercised over its own coal industry 4 years earlier. The response was not renegotiation. The response was Operation Ajax, a joint CIA-MI6 operation authorized by Eisenhower, funded with $1 million in 1953 money, designed to overthrow a democratically elected government and replace it with a monarch who would restore the oil concession. The CIA's internal history of the operation, when it was finally declassified 60 years later in 2013, bore a title worth reading twice. It called the overthrow of Iran's democracy a democratic restoration. The overthrow of a democracy, described as the restoration of one. The cable was 3 words long. The consequences would run for 70 years. The Shah was installed. His secret police, the Savak, trained by the CIA and Mossad, arrested, tortured, and killed thousands of political dissidents over the next 26 years. The moderate opposition was systematically destroyed. The secular nationalists were imprisoned. The liberals were silenced. And into the vacuum that Savak created, a vacuum where every moderate voice had been removed, stepped the only opposition that could not be silenced: the mosques. A 1979 revolution was not a spontaneous religious awakening. It was the documented consequence of 26 years of crushing every alternative to religious opposition. The moderate was destroyed. The radical inherited the space. This pattern, the destruction of the moderate, the empowerment of the extreme, appears in this channel's stories again and again. It appeared in Iran before it appeared anywhere else. But the broken promises did not stop with the coup. During the Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988, when Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons against Iranian soldiers and Kurdish civilians, the documented Western response was nothing. Worse than nothing. The United States provided Iraq with satellite intelligence, knowing it would be used to coordinate chemical attacks. This is not interpretation. It is documented in declassified Defense Intelligence Agency cables published by the National Security Archive. Between 2002 and 2014, while negotiations toward what would become the JCPOA were in various stages of progress, Iran's nuclear scientists were assassinated, 5 of them, on Iranian soil. The operations were attributed to Israel, with documented logistical support from intelligence services whose nations were simultaneously sitting across the negotiating table from Iran, asking for trust. And still, after the coup, after the chemical weapons, after the assassinations, in 2013, the Iranian people elected Hassan Rouhani, a moderate, on a platform of engagement. And Iran sat down, again, at a negotiating table with the same Western powers that had overthrown its democracy, ignored its gassing, and killed its scientists. And Iran made a deal. And Iran complied. If this is the first time you're hearing the full chain, 1953 to 2015, there's more. This channel documents the links between historical decisions and modern headlines that the news cycle doesn't have time to explain. Subscribe. The next piece of this story is already in production. The question that hung over the JCPOA negotiations, the question that Zarif carried into every session, that every Iranian diplomat has carried into every Western negotiation since 1953, was simple. It was not about enrichment percentages or centrifuge numbers or inspection protocols. It was, will you keep your word this time? The answer arrived on the 8th of May, 2018. What followed the withdrawal was not unpredictable. It was predicted by every nuclear policy analyst, every former JCPOA negotiator, every IAEA official who published a compliance report. They said, if you break the deal while Iran is complying, Iran will stop complying, and Iran will have no reason to negotiate again. And the military option you say you want to avoid will become the only option left. Each prediction came true on schedule. Iran began exceeding enrichment limits within a year of the withdrawal. By 2020, uranium enrichment reached 20%. By 2022, 60%. The IAEA cameras that had monitored Iran's facilities, the cameras that proved compliance, were disconnected. The inspectors whose access had been unprecedented were restricted. The verification infrastructure that had taken a decade to build was dismantled in months. The human cost, specific, not abstract. In Paris's pharmacy in the Vanak district, the shelves that had filled under the deal and emptied after its destruction now held something new. Bandages, antiseptic, trauma supplies, the medicines for chronic conditions, the insulin, the blood pressure drugs, the chemotherapy agents were gone. What remained was for the injuries that were coming. The military strikes, when they came, were described in the briefing rooms of the nations that authorized them as necessary prevention. The stated objective was to destroy Iran's nuclear capability. But the nuclear capability that was struck in 2025 was not the nuclear capability that had existed in 2015. In 2015, the capability was dismantled, voluntarily, under verification, in exchange for a promise. The capability that was struck was the capability Iran rebuilt after the promise was broken. The deal had removed the target. The withdrawal recreated the target. And then, the strikes were authorized to destroy the target that the withdrawal had made necessary. In the language of the White House announcement, the withdrawal from the JCPOA was described as an act that would make the world safer. In the language of the documented record, IAEA reports, intelligence assessments, diplomatic cables, and the specific, measurable human cost borne by the Iranian population, it was the act that made the military strikes inevitable. The event the deal was designed to prevent was produced by the decision to destroy the deal. This is not editorial. This is not opinion. This is the documented chain. A deal signed, a deal verified, a deal broken, a capability rebuilt, a capability struck. Each link traceable, each link documented, each link the consequence of the link before it. The Vanak district of Tehran, a pharmacist locks her door at the end of the day. The shelves behind her tell the story better than any policy paper. They were full when the promise was kept. They emptied when the promise was broken. Now they hold what comes after broken promises. A 12-year negotiation. 159 pages. 15 verification reports confirming compliance. 98% of enriched uranium dismantled. 2/3 of centrifuges removed. Concrete poured into a reactor core. All of it. Every technical concession, every political risk, every diplomatic compromise, destroyed by a signature that took 3 seconds. The pattern is 70 years old. The cost is being paid today by people who complied with every agreement and were betrayed by the people who proposed it. Most people will watch tonight's news and see a crisis. You now see a chain. 70 years long, every link documented. If understanding the chain matters to you, and I believe it does, subscribe. New stories every week. The room behind the headline is never what you expect.
This is how we got here.